Welcome to Science Gallery Dublin Online. I'm Jenny McNeill, the programming assistant, and I'm undertaking an MPhil in Identities and Cultures at Trinity College. Today, in honour of the launch of our Systems, User or Used paper exhibition, I will be speaking with a collection of contributing artists and curators. The paper exhibition is a unique limited edition publication designed and produced by Science Gallery Dublin. Reimagining what an exhibition can be in times of necessary distance, it condenses an unseen exhibition from 2020 into a box of prints, essays, zines, and interviews. It spans systems, ecological, political, social, and technological, asking questions like, how well do we really know these systems? How are they all connected? And what are the infrastructures on which they are built? How can we navigate, probe, and challenge them? The publication is available for purchase online at the Science Gallery Dublin website or in person at the Library Project in Temple Bar. Today, I'm excited to be here with curator Frances Hulse and artists Paul ONeill, Sarah Grant, and Patricia Pisanelli, each of whom have contributed towards the creation of the paper exhibition. I might now ask if each of you could give yourselves an introduction, explaining your work and your research interests. We could begin with Paul.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Paul ONeill. I'm an artist and researcher based in Dublin. For the Systems publication, I contributed to it, but I was also the lead researcher for the exhibition and publication. I guess my kind of focus and research area is kind of centered on critiquing and engaging with kind of techno-political solutionism within the context of media art practice.
That's great. Would we be able to go on to Frances now?
Sure. My name is Frances Hulse. I'm lecturer in visual culture at National College of Art and Design here in Dublin, where I, with a colleague, run the master's programs Art in the Contemporary World. In general, I'm interested in ideas of system and how they've been, how people have thought about ideas of system from a kind of historical perspective. So that includes things like the cultural impact of cybernetics and systems theory, but also a kind of a longer history of that back through thinking about system in relation to modernity. So thinking about system in relation to philosophy and aesthetics and art in general.
Thank you. And Patricia?
Hi. So I am in this project with a work called Correcting the Lasagna. So it's a work based on an internet forum where the users speculate on the right order of layering of a lasagna. And as a real life forum, they discuss the rightness of this recipe order in a specific time frame. And so as this first question of the project is, what is the right order? And I need a definite answer. So there's always this search for perfection already implied in those two questions. So as each user starts to give their own answers as text, the explanation becomes very visible. The method for explaining becomes very visible, because some of them explain in a continuous line or as a double line or as a column. So the layering of the subject, the lasagna, becomes layered by the description of the subject. So text becomes image. So I decoded those answers through color. So I changed this system of text and language to a system of color to sort of visualize their method of explaining, to then try and speculate what is the structuring behind it, and then try and think of what we mean when we're searching for a definite answer as well.
Thank you. And Sarah, would you be able to do the same?
Sure. Yes, hi. So I'm an artist and also a professor and researcher, and my practice is basically focused on the internet in general, but also exploring the networks that connect us together and just thinking of ways that we can critically evaluate our our participation in these systems and in these networks, and how we can make our own infrastructures, possibly our own tools, help demystify some of this technology to show that while it is intimidating on its face, there are ways to sort of gain like a certain amount of knowledge that can let us empower ourselves and build our own infrastructures and our own tools for ourselves.
Great, thank you so much. So I think I might start off with Paul and thinking about hidden systems. So Paul, as well as being lead researcher for the Systems exhibition, and then which is what the publication evolved out of, you contributed a piece that has forever changed the way I imagine Sandy Mount Strand. Could you explain a bit further your work with Anne Kiernan on the countermap of Dublin's internet infrastructure?
Sure, yeah. So I guess over the last couple of years, I've been kind of looking at Dublin, which is the city that I'm based in, like doing general research on like the internet, but then kind of linking it more to Dublin, to my surroundings, which, as we're probably all aware, Dublin is home to kind of many of the kind of big tech platforms of the modern era, as a result of kind of a whole host of like issues, be it like tax, political, economic, and so on and so forth. So I began, excuse me, as a starting point, kind of going around this area, Grand Canal Dock of the city, looking at all the companies that are there, so Google, Facebook, Amazon, and then looking more also at the kind of material aspects of the internet within the city. And, that's based on the work of many other artists and researchers doing similar work elsewhere, and kind of applying that logic and rationale of like, where exactly is the internet within Dublin? Like, I know it's in Grand Canal Dock, as in I know it's there within the kind of corporate offices, but where is it and how does my data move? How are we able to have this Zoom call? What are the networks that are being used? So literally, like within the map that's included in the publication, you can see kind of aspects of the internet as it appears in Dublin. So you'll have the Grand Canal Dock area, but then you'll also have like a kind of a red line going around the city, which is the T50 fiber optic cable, which is this huge big fiber optic cable that, as I said, runs around the city, but it's also connected to a lot of the data centers that are actually based here in Dublin as well. So not only is Ireland and Dublin this kind of corporate site of internet power, it's also another site of internet power within the context of the material aspects of the internet, i.e. data centers. So yeah, the project is really just about kind of mapping and documenting, and I guess trying to understand it myself and kind of share the research with other people. And then within the context of the systems exhibition, I was fortunate enough to be able to team up with Anne Kiernan, this brilliant illustrator, and speak kind of in this kind of collaborative process, give this kind of like an abstract counter map. So normally when we see these kind of, if you look up like Google images of Ireland and tech culture, you get all these like wonderful, shiny, glossy images. But we've kind of gone at it a different way, kind of mapping, as I said, fiber optic cables that run around the city, but also out to the sea, and the towers, telephone towers, et cetera, through which all of our data passes through. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with it.
No, it's brilliant. I love the imagery as well. This is maybe like a little bit more personal, but did the research process change your relationship with the city, or was that already changed by the fact that Dublin has seen all of these changes and the Silken Docklands taking up so much space?
It's a really good question. It's a tough question. I mean, I knew of what I knew about Dublin, having lived here most of my life or around here, is this relationship with big tech was always apparent to me. What I didn't realize was just how embedded big tech, if I want to call it here, is embedded. It is here in Dublin, but how dependent Ireland is on these companies now, like how they have really tapped into our economy. And also what's been really interesting is kind of like forward looking, what's going to happen next, what are the big issues coming around the corner in terms of something like data protection, GDPR, et cetera, and it's a kind of constantly evolving space, as it is generally with technology. So sorry, my relationship with the city, I mean, I definitely look at it with different eyes now, yeah, and obviously I'm kind of always thinking about my research as well, so yeah, it's definitely changed. Not sure exactly how yet though.
In a way, this is quite related to some of Francis's work as well, because some of his thinking concerns the presumed intangibility of technology. Would you be able to say a little bit about how you carry that concept through some of your curatorial process and your work more generally, Francis?
As I said in the introduction, I'm really interested in the way in which this idea system has been sort of culturally understood. And in one sense, it does refer to forms of telecommunication and computing and kind of forms of global trade that have emerged in the 20th century, particularly in the kind of after the Second World War. So in that instance, system does mean something related to technology. And as kind of Paul has been looking at, as actually a lot of people here have been looking at, there are sort of ways of identifying that infrastructure and kind of mapping it and kind of revealing it and so on. I think in those cases, we're talking about kind of actual systems, that things that sort of can be pointed to and have some sort of physical sense in the world, right? Some sort of physical manifestation in the world. But the other thing I'm also interested in is the way in which system operates as an idea, as a kind of a metaphor for organization, as a way of thinking about the way in which items are connected in a non-hierarchical way. And in that instance, it's related closely, although they are different, to an idea of network as well. There are different things in play in those two different metaphors. So one thing I'm particularly interested in is the way in which actually system doesn't emerge in the 20th century, but actually goes back behind that, goes back behind the Industrial Revolution and the emergence of kind of systemic modes of production, all the way back through the 18th and 17th century, where it becomes understood as a way of organizing not only society and politics and economics, but also a kind of a way of understanding literary genres, a way of understanding kind of legal systems, and so on and so on. So there's two different kind of understandings of the word system there, I think. One is sort of literal things which refer to infrastructure, and then there's another one which is more metaphorical, and it's to do with the sort of understanding organization.
I think it's you and one of your the essay you contribute to the systems publication. You also suggest that it would be even though challenging, possible to weigh the internet. And this idea of like the materiality of these systems that we sometimes assume to be intangible because of metaphors like the cloud, and which again are systemic metaphors. I was wondering if you had any opinion about like what the implications of this assumption that technology, and specifically technological consumption, is immaterial.
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly people are aware of the fact that it is not immaterial. Something like Bitcoin, for example, uses more electricity and therefore more natural resources than all of Ireland. That these forms of computation that are required in these forms of systemic networks of communication and control have enormous environmental sort of impact. They use a lot of water, they use a lot of petrochemicals and so on and so on. I'm getting the sense that people are talking about that more, and people are aware of the sort of ecological impact of the technologies that we use, that they're not completely virtual. And that goes from things like the natural resources that the internet, for want of a better word, uses, to the sort of the human cost that's required in things like data processing and so on. That, again, we kind of assume that when things are being checked on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, that it's actually people that are doing that. And they're people that are at sort of one remove from us. So there are sort of real physical and human implications to the technology that we use.
No, for sure. I might now turn to Sarah for a little bit, because there is also connections between what we're talking about with immateriality and our general understanding of who can and how to produce like these social networks that all of us have come to completely rely on. So would you be able to talk a little bit about the essay that you contributed for the paper exhibition?
Yeah, so I contributed an essay on basically just discussing technological sovereignty, what it means for communities. I mean, of course, it has, there's two meanings to it. The one meaning is in the context of sovereign nations, and it has a negative connotation actually often in that context, where basically authoritarian governments use, for example, the Snowden revelations that the US, the NSA was spying on everyone as an excuse to really centralize and control the internet or communications infrastructure within national borders and spy on their own citizens themselves, etc. But there's another context of it, which my essay is more about, which is technological sovereignty in the context of communities, and how communities, should have the right to build their own infrastructures and their own networks in order to avoid this top-down corporate control and surveillance and ownership, for example, of our data and tracking our moves. So yeah, so the essay is really about that, just drawing attention to that distinction, and just that, while of course there is some technical knowledge and skill that needs to be acquired before going out and setting up your own mesh network, for example, it is possible nonetheless. And also thinking about how, I mean, another thing I mentioned in the essay is that, the internet was designed, by a very select group of individuals who are kind of like, generally speaking, like older white male academics in the States. And then the web, about 20 years afterwards was pioneered by largely the same demographic. And yet the internet and the web has spread to touch almost every corner of the planet, and many different cultures and different kinds of people coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, education levels, cultural backgrounds, and just that, there's not a one size fits all. I mean, like the internet and the web is, and also the major platforms that we use to stay in touch, like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it's that these were designed by a very specific profile of person, yet it's something that all kinds of people are expected to use. And it's interesting to think about imagining communities designing their own kinds of platforms, their own version of the web. I mean, this is a very big goal. I mean, not to say this is easy to do, but still it's an interesting thought experiment to just consider how would the internet look? How would the web look? How would Twitter look if it was designed by a particular group of people for themselves, And not only that, when you create your own infrastructure and your own self-hosted web servers, for example, there's also this idea of retaining ownership, not just control, but also ownership of your data, rather than having to be sent off to who knows where. So that's the general gist of it, just thinking about these things.
No, I was so into the idea of firstly moving off mass social media websites because all the privacy concerns are so real. But I was wondering if you thought that there might be a time where the convenience of these social networking sites that we all use will be overtaken by a concern for privacy, if there could be a turning point.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. And it's kind of the thing that gets us every time when we try to, when there is an attempt to make a Twitter killer or Facebook killer or whatever. I mean, and it's something I've seen actually happen to lots of really good intention and important open source projects or community, efforts to make alternative infrastructures and tools, is that the interface matters, and not just the convenience, but also how usable it is and how well it's designed. And I know that like very early on when I first got interested in self-hosting and also offline networking, I was checking out some projects which existed around New York City and NYC Mesh, by the way, is a great project. So this does not fall in this bucket. But there were some other projects I checked out, which I forget even now what they were called. But just realizing that I'm a developer, like I understand how to read technical documentation, but the sites, and the projects that were trying to get traction were so hard to understand. They were so technical, like they really lacked this user interface and good design. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, this is something that sort of that is always difficult to overcome, is that these companies have lots of money and full teams of designers, strategists, UX people. I do think that for something to be mass adopted, it does need to be easy to use and understandable. And it's something that I actually have seen getting paid more attention, like for example, with the Brave browser. There's another example too. I'm forgetting now, but I just have seen more examples lately of people trying to create alternatives to these surveillance-heavy applications and platforms. Keeping in mind like realizing that something does have to be well designed and understandable. Because I just think that even in the face of, we all know that we're being surveyed constantly. We all know that our privacy is being compromised, and it hasn't yet been enough to really turn the tide on rejecting these platforms. It will take more than that, I think, but people are starting to pay attention, I think. So it's still positive.
And there's also more and more like huge bestsellers and stuff coming out about like exactly what it is that's going on, really accessible like Netflix programs and things like that, which I think is like showing that the tide is turning, or at least there's greater like mainstream awareness. Just like circling back, I have like 2 more questions about this. Firstly, if there's any like current social media platforms that you see as being kind of more like niche or like embodying that kind of community feeling more than other ones, or at least ones that like exist and that people could feasibly sign up to. And then also what it would take to get society to a point where people could, if they wanted to, create their own like niche social networking site. Would that be a question of like greater technological literacy, or what would you suggest?
Right. Well, the first question is much easier to answer than the second question. I mean, for the first question, Mastodon obviously is a very well designed and developed tool. That's basically like a federated Twitter. And what federated means is that you can host your own, like you can either like join an instance which already exists on Mastodon servers, or you can host your own instance, your own installation of Mastodon on your own server, and then connect to other instances. So you can think of it as like a collection of instances connected to each other rather than one centralized place like Twitter. But Mastodon seems to have had some pretty good traction and adoption. Another one is Nextcloud, of course, in place of Google Docs. Nextcloud, it's like Google Docs or Dropbox maybe put together. You can save files there, create documents, spreadsheets, Kanban boards for like managing projects, and you can also self-host this. And for example, in our studio, we have here at Weiße in Berlin, we self-host all of our own Nextcloud instances. I did set up a Mastodon for Radical Networks. We have this as well. And yeah, and one other person I wanted to call out is Darius Kazemi, who I'd like to, I don't know if I can look it up while we're here in the conversation, but he sent some amazing work on and created amazing documentation and research on how communities can create their own social networks and actually have them be adopted. And I'll look that up in a moment because I would like to actually get his actual website so people know to go check it out. But his work in this area has been really incredible and well thought out and well researched and documented. Now for the second question, sorry, could you actually phrase it one more time? I know it was a really big one, but I just want to make sure I know it.
1 second, I have a
Sure.
goldfish brain, so I need to just remember what it was in the first place.
No worries. While you're looking that up, I found there is a site, so it's runyourown.social, and it's basically this amazingly thorough documentation on how you can run your own small social network site for your friends or whomever you want to be a part of that. And I really encourage people to check that project out.
Amazing. I have remembered what my second question was.
Great.
And it was about what can be done societally to encourage people.
Right.
You kind of answered bits of that.
Yeah.
But would you prefer there to be greater like technological literacy or like learning about coding from a younger age?
Yeah, I think all these things, yeah, I mean, it's a hard question to answer because, I mean, of course, superficially, you could say, yes, more people learn how to code and get training in this kind of thing, or more exposure to this kind of thing, and it's not made to feel so intimidating and unapproachable. That would definitely help, but there has to be like but it's not, it's not enough to just learn how to code. Like there has to be like a cultural shift, I mean, the thing is, people love convenience. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, most people simply don't have time to like make their own networks or tools. So maybe it goes back a bit more. Like maybe it's making more funds available, like public funds to finance projects and people who do want to take these sorts of endeavors on. But then you get into the whole messy entanglement of how like the government and politicians are, entangled with these big corporations. So maybe there's not as much motivation to support these alternatives. I mean, it always comes down to either time, money, interest, a combination of this, and something that I've learned over the years of teaching workshops and giving talks is that ideally people would just care about this and just want to do this. But it's a bit more of a complex issue than that. So I know I don't exactly answer the question, but I think the honest answer is that it's a difficult question to answer. But yeah.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. Back in the UK, actually, the government, maybe in like October, posed like a really simple answer to that question. Well, not in the same context, but after the whole year of like the pandemic and everything, I think it was some sort of computing or like security wing of the government started putting this advert everywhere that showed a picture of a girl wearing like a ballet outfit and taking off her ballet shoes, and the caption was something like Fatima's next job could be in cyber, and people were really upset by this.
I saw that.
Yes, exactly. Because it seemed as if it was just swapping out like one side of education for this like new one, which seems as if it's like really lucrative and obviously a completely different incarnation to what it is that you're talking about. But it's just an interesting question of how we should be reorganizing education in light of all these new things you can be learning. Yes. Patricia, I have a question for you. So for your piece, which I absolutely adore because I'm fascinated by internet forums, you embody like a way more lighthearted interpretation of systems. Could you just tell us the story of your piece, Correcting the Lasagna, and how it came into being?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually looking for the correct order of layers in oil paint on Google, and then the search bar auto-completed with what are the correct orders of where is the correct order of a lasagna. So that broke my own system of research already, which I thought was quite fun because that's my process when I'm making my own artwork most of the time. So I came across this internet forum where this person was quite desperate, asking what is the correct order of a lasagna, and I do need a definite answer. So I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. And yeah, so the other users started to explain their own answers in very different ways. They would write their answer in a column or in a continuous line or in a double line. So their explanation became visual already. So you forget about the text and look at that as its shape, as a graphic thing. So then I wanted to decode that even more because I thought it made me think of their way of explaining something. So their system of explaining. And I have dyslexia, so I take a long time to explain something doing them really directly, as you can notice. But that did really catch my attention. So I wanted to look at their ways of explaining and what was different to the others. So then I decided to decode this explanation by swapping their text with squares of different colors, and then to visualize that explanation in a graphic way, in an even more graphic way. So that whole idea of playing with interconnected systems. So I was swapping the system of explaining by swapping the system of language to the system of color, and try to think of the this idea of the lasagna as, when you think of a lasagna, you think of the memory of that word and what is that word physically as well. You think of semiotics. And then you think about the recipe, that is what constitutes the lasagna itself. And then that recipe is also interchangeable because of cultural tradition or geographic location or the ingredients that you might have available as well. So there are lots of variations on this recipe. And that, in the end, all of the answers are right. All the users were defending their answer as the right one, making them all right. So then, of course, they're all wrong because you cannot have all the right ones, or you can have, but then it's impossible to have a specific defined answer. So that contradicts the question in the first place in the project. And I think that the main thing, one thing is talking about perfection and talking about systems, that they are all subjective. I mean, besides systems found in nature, all the other ones are man-made and made by one person or a group of people. So they can vary. If a system is used in a different one place, might be completely different in another place. And when you think about that, you think about you can control your own system, and you can think of how fluid they are and how interchangeable they are as well. So I don't see them as static. You cannot have a universal system for everything because they are in constant change. It always relies on evolution, and there's another set of circumstances that those systems will change, like we've seen, like in the past 2 years, like many of our systems collapsed, and then we had to find different ones or adapt the existing ones, like we're adapting this project that was meant to be an exhibition, and that was a publication, and it's also an event. So everything adapts. So it's like an ongoing and growing subject. And then same as what Sarah was talking about, I think that because when we remember that systems are subjective, we can choose what systems we can follow and the ones that we don't want to follow, and we can either make our own or choose a different model that we find more suitable. I think we're used to conventions in society. We're just used to following the same systems, but we always have to remember that we are free and we can choose other ones that can be better for us and can be better for our life in society as well. And I think, yeah, if we can even like respond to like how to order the lasagna, it's really hard to like respond to like a general word related issue as well. But, yeah.
That was a great explanation. Thank you. So you kind of answered this, or like touched on the idea of perfection a little bit in what you were explaining. But do you think, so the original question posed by what is the perfect lasagna system? Do you think there is danger in that idea that a system could be perfect? Should we be accepting of the idea that systems are contingent and cultural artifacts?
Yeah, I don't think there is a danger. I think it's part of how we are. We are thinking beings, and we will always want to find an efficient way to live our lives. We're always trying to find the best products and services. It could not just be like popular searches, but what is the most, it could be environmentally friendly, or it could be more suitable for many different reasons. And I think the search is intrinsic to us. I think even like Schopenhauer talks in philosophy, tackles that we're moved by will. So we're moved by desire, we have this craving, and then when we fulfill, we have a new one. And that's a primal thing, we're born with it, and we just use knowledge to select the perfect object and then try and find it. So I think it is part of us, and it is a search for happiness, or is just a search for us to live a better life. And yeah, I think it could be problematic trying to find a static system. And I think it's a utopic idea as well, because it cannot be intact and static, because we are thinking beings and time's passing, circumstances change all the time, so those systems will have to change. It's unavoidable.
Totally, thank you. So returning a little bit to Francis and Paul, and just thinking in light of our discussions of some of the like exhibits and everything that everyone has contributed to the paper exhibition, and your own parts in kind of curating and gathering everything together, did you arrive with any preconceptions about which systems you wish to explore, or any messages about systems that you hoped the paper exhibition could impart onto its audience?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for me personally anyway, during the process, like of my own work and of the kind of the wider publication exhibition itself, I mean, I guess my background focused on, I suppose, kind of the technopolitics of systems, I guess, in a kind of contemporary context. And yeah, I mean, it all started about 2.5 years ago. So the summer of 2019. And the systems I was thinking about then were, I guess, like a reflection. What had influenced my direction up until that point had been like cases like Cambridge Analytica, the US president at the time, et cetera, and then obviously the pandemic happened like in the middle of all of this. So this was like a really clear advertisement for, oh wow, yeah, systems can break, and when they do, you know, we're all completely dependent and kind of intertwined with them. In terms then of, I mean, how, like, say for example, like what can we do about all of these systems? How can we fix them? Can we fix them? Is fixing them the kind of right way to go about it? I guess I've learned on like kind of a lot of what Sarah says, learned from people like Sarah and other artists featured in the publication. You know, there are some general things going forward that I'll be taking with me. So one thing would be like a kind of forever push towards transparency in relation to kind of techno-political systems, and you can, that can be like from, I don't know, from academic research, from creative practice, but also from more kind of like say grassroots activism, etc., etc. These systems need to be kind of constantly kept in check. They need to be challenged, they need to be critiqued, and it's not always that they're acting with, you know, nefarious intent. It's just the complexity of all of these different systems upon each other. You know, we really kind of have to untangle them. Then I guess some other like ideas, and again, I think Sarah kind of touched on this idea of like literacy, but maybe literacy itself it's not enough. You know, there has to be, it's not enough for us all just to go and learn how to code. That's not really going to solve anything, but maybe more like a kind of critical engagement with the consequences of using all of these different technological systems. And then also, again, to paraphrase Sarah here, like there just needs to be a greater diversity of voices, basically, and greater inclusion in these conversations. So that's kind of what I'm taking away from all of this.
Thank you. That was a great answer. And Francis, did you have anything to add?
No, I mean, Paul has said that really well in terms of thinking about the sort of social and political implications of system. If nothing else, an exhibition like this does something which I'm very interested in, which is just bring that word system into sort of the public so people think about it. I'm fascinated by the idea that if you look for this word system, you'll find it everywhere. It's like you'll find it on toothpaste tubes and shoes and air conditioning, like wherever. It's almost ubiquitous. But we sort of tend to not talk about system that much, or at least that's what an exhibition like this can do. It can kind of make one aware of the fact that this regulating metaphor of system is completely ubiquitous, and it infuses every element of our lives and how we think about every aspect of our lives and how it's lived. And this isn't in contradiction to what Paul said, but I'm also interested in the way a lot of the exhibits and the projects have also highlighted this idea of system through an aesthetics, right? Sort of, so that's not just the political, but there's also kind of an aesthetic way of thinking about system, be that the way that Patricia has done that really kind of brilliantly, or Pip Thornton and the receipts and so on. But that we can also start to think about an aesthetics of systems as well, which might also be another way of thinking about them or kind of drawing attention to them.
Well, thank you, everyone. This was great being able to speak to you, and just thank you for your contributions to the Systems paper exhibition. It's been wonderful. I just have to final plug for Science Gallery. If you are wanting to purchase this, it is available at Science Gallery Dublin online or in the library project in Temple Bar. Yeah, thank you, everyone.